Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. This time it's going to be a more somber affair, I'm afraid, as we discuss something that none of us truly appreciated enough in its time. It had a huge impact on me, I'm sure it had a huge impact on many other people, and I think it had a global impact that many of us have sort of forgotten or perhaps haven't noticed yet, but hopefully this video should shine a light on that. It's been gone for too long now, and it's time for us to either move on or just raise our hands in appreciation of it. Now that it's gone, I can't help but feel partly responsible because, well, I should have done more. But I'm doing my bit now, and I am of course talking about Grindcore Karaoke. Grindcore Karaoke was founded in late 2010, with the first release coming out on New Year's Day 2011, and it was a free online record label that specialised in grindcore, hardcore, noise, and other forms of underground experimental music. It was founded by the one and only Jay Randall, who some of you may know better as the mouthpiece from Agoraphobic Nosebleed. Agoraphobic Nosebleed, of course, being one of the most influential and iconic grindcore bands of the 21st century. And on New Year's Day, the record label released its very first release, Grindcore Luau by a band called Waj. Now this was a throwback to Terrorizer, Extreme Noise, Terror Discharge, Heresy, bands of that nature. Old school grindcore with a slightly humorous twist on it, as you can tell by the artwork and if you go look on the website, the song titles. But yeah, it was a solid album and a very important start to the record label, really set the bones about what it was going to be, although it didn't really stick to it too closely, as we'll get to later when I give you a rundown on the essential Grindcore Karaoke albums. Now, as I mentioned, everything on the record label was purely for free, and this meant that everything could be released super quickly, and unlike many record labels, they reached their 200th release within 2 years, and that might sound crazy, but Jay Randall, as I saw in an interview with him, he described that if the band had stuff done for him and booklets and artwork and stuff, they would send it over and there'd be a new release on Grindcore Karaoke within an hour of getting the first email regarding the band. And that might sound crazy now, but really it was a truly exciting time, and I was in on the record label from around 2012 and I followed it for about a year. You could go a week and have 2 or 3 more free grindcore albums in your collection. And sometimes it wasn't even grindcore, and it was always interesting, and you could always count on that. Not everything the record label released was brilliant. In fact, Jay Randall himself released some fairly dire noise music on there under the title Japanese Torture Comedy Hour, I believe. I remember downloading the album Dolphin Meat and being fairly bemused by it. But in the main, everything that I downloaded off that website was at the very least interesting, and in many cases really, really good, as we'll get to later. And for me, it was a really pivotal point in my evolution as a music listener, because I always envy people with big record collections, or people who grew up in grindcore scenes, people who grew up around cool bands. I always thought it was such a cool thing to be a part of, and I always felt like I was sort of on the outside looking in growing up in England. You know, if you go to HMV, then what are you going to find? You might find a Napalm Death album, maybe a Morbid Angel album. That's as close as you're going to get to anything truly obscure or interesting. But other than that, anything that was slightly out there or bizarre, it was unlikely that you were going to be able to purchase it in your normal shop. And finding a website where you could take a gamble on an album just by the title or the album cover, and maybe it was something great, and in some cases it was something great, and in many cases it was even something tremendous. It never floundered, but I think in 2014 that's when the last release came out, and nothing's really been heard of them since. Jay Randall hasn't really spoken about it all that much. There hasn't seemed to be much of a furore for it to come back or anything. Maybe it's just that some things have their day, I'm not sure. I would love to see a return to Grindcore Karaoke because I'm sure there's so many bands out there who would see it as a useful platform. Some bands were discovered there and were given physical pressings, and in a couple of cases the careers even took off. And I was actually looking at the website recently and I was discovering some bands who I'm a big fan of now, but I had never realised who were on Grindcore Karaoke, like Employed to Serve, who are possibly the leading light in British hardcore at the moment. In fact, I believe 2 years ago, or in 2017, they had Album of the Year in Kerrang, and to see an EP of theirs, a 2-song EP, on Grindcore Karaoke from 5 years ago, it just showed how strongly his finger was on the pulse of what was exciting in extreme music. And again, not everything was perfect. There's quite a lot of music on there that's a bit average, or some that's just not good at all. But that's going to be the case with the record label that releases 2 albums a week, or 200 albums within 2 years. You know, you're bound to come across some music that is less than stellar, and maybe that's just a matter of opinion. However, there were some records which were truly, truly special, and I want to get into that now by listing some of my absolute favourites. So we've already talked about Waj, but the next time I want to talk about is Water Torture, who released their self-titled EP, debut EP in fact, on the website. Purely drums, purely bass, power violence band from Buffalo, New York, for fans of Infest or Man is the Bastard, that sort of thing, really old school power violence. This EP was just absolutely ferocious. I remember the first time I heard it and I just thought, this is the complete package. I love that style of artwork, I love that font, I love the music, I love the title. I just thought everything was absolutely stunning about this band. And again, I didn't really hear much about them. A couple of years later, I believe they released an album, but I'm not even sure they're a functioning band anymore. But again, if you go over on Grindcore Karaoke, you can find this album for free. I'm not sure if you can still download things, but it's certainly streaming over there. And I highly recommend you do it. It's definitely my favourite out-and-out grinding, hardcore, power violence sort of thing that I discovered on that site. Up next, in a similar vein, there was a band called Cloud Rats who released 2 albums on there, and my personal favourite was their self-titled album. This was more of a ferocious, kind of high-end power violence sort of attack. Again, things like The Locust or Iron Lung, and this album just absolutely kicked my teeth in when I first heard it. It completely blew me away. I listened to it loads. And also, very catchy, remarkably catchy. Like, there's hooks on that album which I could still sing to you now if you asked me to. I won't do you the displeasure of doing that, but you'll just have to take my word for it. So yeah, Cloud Rat released a great album on there. They were really the band that cemented my trust in the record label, and I continue to download things from there. Up next, in a completely different sphere, there's a band called Human Touch, who were a sort of riot girl hardcore punk band. And similar to Cloud Rat, some really stunning vocal hooks. Not necessarily melodious, but just real bark-along choruses and hooks and that sort of thing. That was entirely eloquent, wasn't it? Just a really solid EP they released on there. Again, nothing particularly groundbreaking or special, but just something that I've found a great deal of joy in. Again, I love the artwork, I love the band name. That opening song, Youth Prison, I remember when that starts and you get that fantastic opening vocal line by, I can't remember her name, but it's something, I think her name was Chelsea, there might be a different vocalist in the band, and just thinking, like, wow, this is... Riot Girl music doesn't really do much for me, but when it's ferocious like that, it's pretty irresistible, to be honest. So yeah, Human Touch released a great album on Grindcore Karaoke, and that's really one of the ones that I think goes under the radar the most. The other bands I'm going to mention, they sort of gained a following, but no one really went for this band, and I don't really understand why, but hopefully this video will give them some exposure. And up next, and this is perhaps the furthest away from most of what this music is, Corrupt Autopilot released an album called Greetings from Ghost Country on there. And they in fact released 2 albums on Grindcore Karaoke. I remember downloading the first one, which was called Inside the Crystal Palace, which I just thought was like kind of shit indie noise rock. It really did nothing for me, and I really had very little interest in the band, other than maybe their name. And then I saw they'd released this album, Greetings from Ghost Country, and I thought the artwork was really surreal and weird, and it hyped my interest in the band, so I thought, you know what, it's free, I'm going to try it. And this was actually possibly one of my favourite albums, second, third favourite that I heard on the site. It was completely different from the other one. It was sort of like a neo-folk, I actually can't talk, neo-folk meets bluegrass, which seems like 2 things that would never really go together, but it did, and it sounded superb. Definitely one of the leading lights on Grindcore Karaoke, but one of the bands that, again, not many people seem to mention all that much, which is a real shame because that one was really special, and there isn't much about this band. If you go on Sputnik Music, there's nothing about them. I'm not sure if there's anything on them on Rate Your Music. They really sound like a truly underground band, and I don't know any of the members' names or who's in the band or anything like that. Am I just lazy? Perhaps, but this is a band that seemed to disappear without a trace, but at least they released 1 truly great album. And finally, you know I couldn't do this video without talking about it. This is where I actually discovered Death Grips' debut mixtape, Ex-Military. It maintains as my favourite release that Death Grips have ever done, closely run by the Money Store, but other than that, I think Ex-Military is head and shoulders above everything. I remember seeing the artwork and thinking, oh, it's going to be like a Infest-style grindcore album. And then downloading it, hitting play, having that great Charles Manson speech, and I thought, oh, I see what they're doing. They're doing like a Brutal Truth-style sample before the song starts. This is good. And then this really weird, experimental, high-progressive hip-hop comes in, and I thought, this is a bit weird for Grindcore Karaoke. And I remember listening to the whole album and just thinking, wow, this band are fucking great. And it wasn't long after that they signed to Epic Records, and that was a really mind-blowing moment, because I went, how does a band go from releasing their album for free on Grindcore Karaoke to ending up on Epic Records releasing their debut album, The Money Store, and it being a critical and commercial success? Now, they didn't last long on that record label, but just to see a band go from humble beginnings on a free Grindcore Bandcamp label. I don't like to do this and go, oh, I was into it first or whatever, but it was a band that I was in on fairly early on, more earlier on than a lot of the other people who are in my immediate friend circle. Not that I'm bragging, I just spent too much time on the internet at the time. Yeah, that's probably the best album that I discovered on there. and I probably shouldn't have even need to talk about it. I'm sure many of you already knew that it ended up on there, but yeah, it was probably, that's definitely the most special album that Grindcore Karaoke ever released, in my opinion, and that seems like a good place to end as any. You know, I don't think it's ever coming back. If it does, I'll be there and I'll be downloading pretty much everything again like I was many years ago. I'm not entirely sure why it shut down or why it stopped. I guess Jay Randall had other things to do. Agoraphobic Nosebleed started up again, so maybe that was taking up most of his free time. So I'm not sure. Maybe they'll come back, or maybe there'll be a similar thing. But to be honest, maybe it's just a flash in the pan movement. Maybe it can only last 2 or 3 years before it burnt out. And once you've released however many hundred of albums it is, you've done your service. You've done more than most record labels do in 30 or 40 years. So I can't begrudge you too much. So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you very much for watching. Links to my Facebook page as well as my Instagram and Grindcore Karaoke, because it may not still be going, but there's plenty of bands on there that you can discover. There's loads of bands I didn't mention on there. Bands like No Anchor released great albums on there. Jucifer, I believe, released their debut EP from like the 90s on there. So there's loads of interesting stuff on there. I don't think you'll ever, run out of stuff to hear. Well, you will eventually, but it would take a while. If you start now, you could just get months and months of interesting music. So at this time of the year especially, when not much is coming out, go check out Grindcore Karaoke. I'm sure you'll find something you like on there. I'm not paid for this promotion or anything. I've just been thinking recently about all the stuff that really impacted me growing up and all the music that I cared about and what was important, what made significant changes to me. And it would be dishonest to not mention this record label, place, website thing. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. See you guys in another video.